Okay, welcome back. I want to share my final thoughts on hermeneutics and hermeneutical injustice. So the first thing, one of the main points I've been trying to make over the last 3 days is that hermeneutics really shows how deep hermeneutical injustice can run. Hermeneutics makes the point that interpretation permeates our life, permeates our emotions, permeates our very experiences and the way we perceive the world. And these interpretations are shaped by language. So to the extent that language functions to keep us from being able to recognize the injustice of our situation, it functions not just at a cognitive level where we lack the words, but it also functions at an experiential level, at a perceptual level, and an emotional level. So we don't even have the kinds of emotions to tell us something is wrong, right? At times there may be a sense things are off, this doesn't feel right, but we don't have the vocabulary to legitimate that emotion, to put that emotion into words, to explain what it is, what is the import in our environment that is triggering this feeling in a way that accurately reflects the injustice of the situation. So the bad news from hermeneutics about hermeneutic injustice is how deep hermeneutic injustice runs. It's not just a matter of not having the right word, as if offering people the word will solve the problem, as if the sorts of solutions that might work for testimonial injustice, the kind of listening that takes them seriously as having something to say, that simply believes them, isn't enough to do the trick. That's the bad news. The good news we get from hermeneutics is about the power of language, precisely because language functions in so many ways of our lives, in so many ways it shapes ourselves, constructs and shapes ourselves, constructs and shapes our experiences, constructs and shapes our perceptions, constructs and shapes our emotions, our effective responses to the world around us. Transformations in language can be fundamentally transformative. And Charles Taylor yesterday in the video I watched talked about trying to use language in expressive and transformative ways. Use language in ways that change the way we relate to ourselves and the way we relate to the world. So that is the first main point I want to make about what hermeneutics has to tell us about hermeneutic injustice. There's a tendency to see Fricker as saying there's epistemic injustice. They come in two kinds: testimonial, hermeneutic. Testimonial is this character, hermeneutic is this character. It's just two different branches. But really, there is not a parallel here. Testimonial injustice does not operate at the same level of hermeneutic injustice. Let's think about the experience of each. So often it's the case with testimonial injustice. You're very aware that this is going on. You understand that you know something. You understand that you have something to say, right? And you are not being taken seriously. And you recognize you are not being taken seriously. You recognize that you are being ignored or overlooked, or somebody else is given more credibility than you are because of something, because of a prejudice, because of something about you that is unrelated to your expertise and what you know, right? So testimonial justice often isn't a confusing event. You realize this is happening when it's happening. Hermeneutical injustice is much more complicated. The way hermeneutical injustice often works, well, let's look back at the examples that we saw. Let's look back to the example of Wendy Sanford. Wendy Sanford is a woman who suffered from postpartum depression, right? And then she began to talk to people in Boston in the early 70s, and she realized it's not her. It's a thing. Postpartum depression is a thing, right? Part of the experience of hermeneutical justice is this experience that it's me. I'm broken. Something's off here, and what's off here is me, right? There's something wrong with me that keeps me from able to fit. There's something wrong with me that keeps me being able to be the mom I want to be to my child. And so that is part of the experience of hermeneutical justice. And built into that experience is a kind of shame, right? Shame we talked about as the socially constructed emotion of recognizing yourself as not fitting into social norms, right? So in this experience of hermeneutic injustice, there is this experience of I don't belong, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, I'm deficient, I'm deviant, and there's a shame that goes with it. I'm reminded of the way Zara talked about the way we treat children as being deficient human beings, deficient adults, and how misleading that is and how mistaken that is, but also how that's part of the message, right? She said at one point, the kid said, I'm almost human, right? Then part of the message, part of the ways in which hermeneutical justice is an injustice, is part of the message of hermeneutical justice is this absence is not just an absence. It's not just, I can't find the word to explain my experience. It's that I'm less than human, right? There's something wrong with me. I'm deviant, I'm defective, I'm broken. And so her experience then, realizing there's this thing called postpartum depression, right? It immediately is a shame dump. It's not me. I mean, yes, there's something wrong with her in a sense, but it's not her. And she's not alone. That's one of the other experiences. So we understand something about the experience of hermeneutical injustice by understanding the experience of a hermeneutical justice. She realizes, I'm not alone, right? She realizes it's not me. I'm not broken. I'm not alone. This is a thing, right? And really, for the first time, she can start to trust her experiences. That is one of the ways in which hermeneutical injustice is an epistemic injustice. It's not just you can't find the words, and as a result, you're not very articulate and you can't communicate to others or to yourself. It's that it undermines your own ability to trust your own emotions, to trust your own experiences. This is why gaslighting is a good example. Gaslighting is a particularly insidious example where somebody else actively undermines your ability to trust your own emotions and your experiences. But the idea is that if you're being gaslit, you lose a kind of epistemic confidence in your own thoughts, in your own feelings. And the narrator of Yellow Wallpaper, she was never given a name, she talks about the shame of her feelings and hiding those from her husband, and it makes her crazy. So, and this reminds me of something that Haley brought up, right? Haley talked about how testimonial injustice repeatedly can lead to a lack of intellectual confidence and a kind of self-doubt. And hermeneutical justice does that in spades. It belongs to really the nature of hermeneutical justice, that it communicates and embeds this self-doubt in the victim so that they come to ascribe their lack of fitting to themselves. There's something wrong with them, right? So this starts then to give us a picture of what hermeneutics can tell us a solution looks like, right? What ways we can go, as William said yesterday, quoting Jose Molina, we need more than just dialogue to solve problems of hermeneutical justice. What can hermeneutics tell us about what will help with hermeneutical justice? Well, again, let's go back to the examples. Wendy Sanford, right, realized she had postpartum depression, right? So she has this realization about herself. What she also does is she is one of the founders of this Boston Women's Health Collective, and she co-authors the book Our Bodies, Ourselves. This is a massively influential book about women's bodies in a way in which it does what many of the hermeneutical justice things attempt to do, which is we can talk about this, we can put words to this, we can understand that things that you're experiencing are normal, they're common, it's not just me, right? In some ways, the Me Too movement put it exactly right. Part of the experience of hermeneutical justice is Me Too. It's not just me, it's a thing, right? So Wendy Sanford is a good example of what we need, right? How language can help. We need these stories of people going through these experiences, having these recognitions, and then communicating to others, it's not just you. You are not alone. You too, me too. Hannah Gadsby is another great example. That maybe was the highlight of the 3 talks, was 2 minutes of listening to Hannah Gadsby's stand-up comedy. But, so she's living in rural Australia, growing up there. She realizes she's a lesbian, remarkably. But then she says, where are my people? And she realizes she doesn't fit in the way people are being represented. So there's a second alienation for her. All right, she overcomes the first alienation of not fitting in the recognition, oh, this is it. I'm a lesbian. That's a thing. This is not just me. All right, and then she's like, oh, but I'm apparently the wrong kind of lesbian. All right, or the quiet ones, or the ones who love the sound of a teacup landing just right on a saucer. The very fact that Hannah Gadsby is doing that stand-up routine is providing voice for the millions in the community of quiet lesbians to be able to say, yes, that's it. That's it. That's me too. Right, exactly. Right? That's the transformative experience of hermeneutical injustice, in the recognition you are not messed up. It's not you. It's a thing. You are not alone. So we need more of those stories. Right? That's the first thing. We need more of those stories, and we need them more widely publicized, and we need to welcome them with the kind of recognition of the thou that Gadamer says we need, with curiosity and recognition of insight. There's a second thought here. The second thing that I might say we need, and I got this Williams talk about Plato made me think about this, because Plato says, and Aristotle says, that to be a friend to another person, you have to be a friend to yourself. Right? And so if we put those in Gadamer terms, to be a friend to another person is to treat them as a thou, is to believe them, is to hear what they are saying and attend to what they are saying as something that's insightful, not just something that might be rational but wrong, right? Or just merely coherent, right? But something that actually has something to tell you. Right. And if the idea is we need to be friends to ourselves as well as friends to others, one of the ways in which we can address hermeneutical injustice, perhaps in ourselves, is by trusting our own experiences, our own feelings, finding the words for them, trusting that there are insights in them, treating ourselves as a thou, inviting ourselves to speak the insights of our experiences, inviting us to speak in a way that the insights of our experiences become clear to ourselves and to others. All right, so that's another way where hermeneutics helps us see how we can practice hermeneutical injustice, by inviting even in ourselves a kind of bringing things to words repeatedly over and over again in different ways, such that our own emotions and our own perceptions, our own experiences become sources of insight. And I can say even more, drawing upon this theory of friendship that we get in Gadamer, going back to Plato, understanding how they can point us to what's good for us. They point us away from how we might be thinking of ourselves as broken and towards how we can think of ourselves as good. The third thing we need is vocabularies, new ways of talking, right? We need many expressions to bloom that allow us to reconceptualize, to think about things, to put common experience into words. I think of 2 recent examples, fairly recent examples. One is the term mansplaining that Rebecca Solnit coined for an experience that many people have had, and as soon as she came up with that word, it sort of nailed what was happening in that experience of mansplaining. And then the experience that Kate Manny came up with, a word called himpathy. And himpathy is a kind of excessive empathy for a man who has to address publicly perhaps his poor behavior, harassing behavior, maybe even illegal behavior. And her example was the ways in which there is all this outpouring of empathy for poor Brett Kavanaugh, who had to publicly address these accusations. All right, she talks about this as a kind of exaggerated form of empathy for these people who are just simply put in a position of taking responsibility, expected to take responsibility for their actions. So those are 2 words. There are other words, and what we need to sort of encourage is a a proliferation of vocabularies and new words, and with them new ways of thinking and new ways of talking and new ways of conceptualizing and new ways of experiencing and new ways of noticing and new ways of feeling. Finally, when we take seriously that at the part of the epistemic injustice of hermeneutical injustice is the self-doubt and the shame and the sort of cycle of epistemic uncertainty, we need to make sure that we resist the narratives that continually perpetuate the idea that these people that are marginalized because they are deviant. The people who don't have the opportunity to articulate the experiences that other people do don't have it because they are deficient in some way, because they are broken in some way, because they are disordered in some way. We need to fight and resist the narratives that fuel the shame. So those are my thoughts at the end here. Those are my thoughts about what hermeneutics can teach us about hermeneutical injustice, teach us about the depths of hermeneutical injustice, can teach us about the way that hermeneutical injustice really is an epistemic injustice, and also can point to the ways in which we can respond to hermeneutical injustice and create more hermeneutical justice.